Welcome into the Hang Time Podcast. A.Q. Smith here in Atlanta. My main man, John Schumann, is in New Jersey. The NBA playoff shoot, it's here. It's upon us. And we're going to take a look at all of the first round series on the East and Western Conference sides of the conference divide. It took us forever to get our matchups locked in, all the way down to the last games played in the Western Conference, but we have them. And let's start out with the West U right away with the defending champion Warriors in the 1-8 matchup against the Clippers. Any possibility at all of the Golden State Warriors getting some trouble from the Clippers in this series, John?
Probably not. The fact that the Warriors sort of turned it up defensively in the sort of last couple months of the season convinces me that they're sort of ready for this postseason a little bit more maybe than they were last year. And last year they had the number one defense in the postseason after ranking 11th in the regular season. Their starting lineup with DeMarcus Cousins was the best defensive lineup after the All-Star break. That tells me that, they figured some things out on that end of the floor. And I hesitate to give the Clippers a game. I think this is maybe the series other than Milwaukee, Detroit in the East that is most likely a sweep, just because the Warriors are too good. And they're healthy. They're healthy, I think. Right. There was a little bit of a scare with Steph Curry in their second to last game, I think it was. But if they're healthy, and if they're a little bit more focused defensively than they were for most of the regular season, then I think they should be locked in. I think, and you know what? I keep coming back. I keep thinking about it. I think a perfect postseason should be that's something that they missed out on a couple of years ago.
You think that drives them this time around, trying to be?
I don't know. I think they could. It's possible. It would be tough, especially running into Houston, but it shouldn't. They shouldn't dismiss it, and I think they should feel the need to take care of business in the first round, especially with Houston looming possibly in the second round, and keep their foot on the gas.
Game one of that 1-8 matchup between the Warriors and Clippers, Saturday night at 8 Eastern on ABC. And we're going to run through all of the series, as I mentioned, but be sure to check out playoff previews on NBA.com for all of these series. You can find all the content you need on NBA.com. Each and every series, the details you need, and predictions for each and every one of them. The 2-7 in the West U, game one Saturday at 10:30 Eastern on ESPN. The Nuggets and Spurs. Nuggets had to sweat out that 2 seed. And now you get to me, which is potentially the most difficult draw, in that I don't like the idea of Greg Popovich having all this time to figure out ways to frustrate a Denver team that really does not have the kind of playoff experience that you would hope for in a matchup against a team like the Spurs.
Yeah, it's interesting. These are the two teams that had the biggest home road differential as far as point differential per 100 possessions. Basically, Denver had the biggest. San Antonio had the second biggest. The Spurs were, I think I've mentioned this before, 1-11 on the road against the other West playoff teams. And the one win was over the Clippers. And so, the home team won all the games in the regular season series between these two teams, although 3 of the games are close. I don't know. I'd be interested. I'm a little bit fascinated by the Spurs defense. This is the first year since they drafted Tim Duncan, where they had a below average defense, and it was downright awful on the road. But like you said, Popovich has got now, he can focus on one team full time. And if you ever talk to him during the regular season, and if you ask him during the regular season about the opponent, he basically tells you, I don't know about the opponent because we just focus on ourselves during the regular season. He's not a team. They're not a team that worries too much about the scouting report, I think, during the regular season. And I think in the postseason, he can finally focus on the opponent and determine the best way, what they need to take away from Denver on the defensive end of the floor. So maybe they will be an improved defensive team in the postseason, given the focus on one single opponent. I'd be curious to see that.
What about Jokic in, this being his first opportunity to really shine in a playoff setting? Do you think he's prepared for the pressures that come with being a player of his status in the postseason?
That's a great question. You've seen signs of frustration from him, especially late in the season. And so obviously with in the postseason where, there's a little bit extra emphasis on every single possession, every single foul or non-foul call. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he deals with it. He's a dude that can get frustrated, but like he's still a matchup nightmare, I think, for San Antonio. They don't have, the big men defenders that can deal with him. If you look at their front line, it's LaMarcus Aldridge, it's Davis Bertans,
right?
Pirtle, maybe. I'd be curious to see if Pirtle, gets some playing time against Jokic in this series. Might be an interesting matchup. And at the same time, a lot will depend on Denver's guards. They can be hot and cold.
Right.
Jamal Murray, especially, he could be an X factor.
Yeah, it should be an interesting. I like that matchup in that 2-7 in the West. The 3-6 is really interesting. Game 1 is Sunday at 3:30 Eastern on ABC. The Blazers and Thunder. You talk about two teams with redemption on the brain in terms of trying to wipe away the funky smell of last season's playoff flameouts on both sides. The Blazers getting swept by the Pelicans the way they did, the Thunder being upset by the Jazz. Which one of these two has the most to prove? And maybe it's equal. Maybe they're both carrying all that baggage from last year's playoffs into this series and throwing it out there and trying to sort out which one of these teams is going to have that playoff breakthrough they need and which one is still going to be stuck when this thing is over.
Well, I mean, Portland's missing Nurkic, so it's hard to say that they have some. I mean, you could use that as a motivation tool and say, yeah, we have something to prove that we could win without him. At the same time, it's an excuse, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Thunder go in relatively healthy. Obviously, they never got Andre Roberson back, but they are healthy as they were over the course of the regular season. And so, I mean, I think Oklahoma City should be the favorite just because they're healthy. They swept the regular season series.
It's the only series other than Milwaukee, Detroit, where you have one team that won all four or all of the regular season matchups too, which is kind of strange for it.
But all four games are pretty close in this one. One of them went to overtime. It's just fascinating to me that you have Denver, San Antonio, Portland, and Oklahoma City on one side of the bracket, and that one of those four teams is going to get to the conference finals. Denver having not won a playoff series in 10 years and with three starters basically with no playoff experience whatsoever.
Right.
San Antonio, like I said, just being an awful road team and coming from the 7th seed, in order for them to get to the conference finals, they'd have to win more road games in the first two rounds than they won against Western Conference playoff teams in all of the regular season. Portland, with missing their second most important player in Nurkic.
You rate him as their second most important ahead of McCollum?
Important, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to say best player, I don't.
That's fine.
Important, yeah. If you talk about both ends of the floor, the balance that he gives them with some scoring inside, I think he's their second most important player. Okay. And then Oklahoma City, which is the one Western Conference team that had a losing record after the All-Star break. It's one of those four teams, as flawed as they all may be, is going to get to the conference finals, which is sort of fascinating to me, which is cool. Like it means we'll have a different conference finals than we had last year. And I think that side of the bracket is fairly wide open. Like I said, given the flaws of all four, I don't know who your pick would be.
Now, that's tough. The Nuggets obviously should be the team if you think about it theoretically. They were the ones that showed us, over the course of the regular season that they were most suited to be, in that position. But there's something about the Thunder as a wild card that, I don't know,
they feel like the safest pick just because of their talent and their defense, like they
I don't know.
Obviously had top 5 defense.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know if I trust what the Thunder bring to the table beyond Russ and Paul George. I need to see their supporting cast perform to a level that I could say, all right, I could see this team getting to the conference finals and putting up a fight. There are no guarantees, obviously, in the playoffs, but the closest thing we have to it is the Warriors being as close to a lock as you could be to get into to conference finals of anybody in the league. And that's with what to me is the most delightful and fascinating development that happened on the last night of the season, and that's the 4-5 being the Rockets and Jazz. Game one of that series is Sunday at 9:30 Eastern on TNT. They're going to decide who deals with the Warriors in the conference semifinal shoe. And if it's the Rockets, this comes well ahead of what they expected in terms of they were eyeing the 2 seed, when they finished their regular season Tuesday night in Oklahoma City with a loss on a Paul George three-pointer, basically, in the waning seconds. Now they're going to have to potentially see the Warriors, if that's what transpires in this series against the Jazz, in the second round. That's much sooner, I'm sure, than a lot of us imagined we'd get a chance to see that potential rematch from last year's conference finals. But I don't know if it's better or worse if you're the Rockets to catch the Warriors earlier rather than later.
It might be better, in that there's a better chance that James Harden James Harden will be maybe a little bit fresher earlier in the playoffs. Chris Paul, maybe there's a better chance that Chris Paul is healthy early in the playoffs rather than late in the playoffs.
Right.
That's not trying to take a shot at him, but
no, you're right. It's just history.
It's just history. But I wouldn't look past the Jazz if I'm Houston.
Right.
The Jazz are the Western Conference team, the only Western Conference team that held Houston's offense, which ranks second overall, under a point per possession in the regular season. Mm-hmm. Houston's offense was rather anemic in their first three meetings. It had a much better game in their final meeting. Their 3-point shooting was other than James Harden, was pretty terrible against Utah. And then obviously Rudy Gobert is, the rim protector. And there'll be lots of meetings between Harden attacking the basket and Gobert waiting there. I'll be curious to see if Houston plays some sort of small ball with PJ Tucker at the 5 to try to draw Gobert away from the basket. I'll also be curious to see if Utah goes more to their Jay Crowder at the 4 lineup, so that he can come in there and maybe even guard Harden at times. Did you see some after the Jazz Clippers game on Wednesday night? Mm-hmm. They showed video of
Patrick Beverley
and Jay Crowder with Beverley great. Seemingly giving Crowder tips on how to defend James Harden. I thought that was fascinating. And so I think, is Crowder now the primary defender on Harden? Because he's not even a starter in Utah, full time. So will Utah even, start their Crowder lineup rather than their Favors lineup?
I would suggest Pat Beverley focus his attentions on guarding Stephen Curry. But I mean, hey, he's multitasking. Good for him.
So that was fun. There's lots of intrigue in this series. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell in his second postseason will be a focal point, and we'll see who gets that matchup for Houston. They
didn't have anybody that was well suited for it last year. He ate him alive until he got hurt in that series last year. To me, he was the most outstanding player in that series until Chris Paul took over and he got hurt and kind of changed the whole direction that thing was going. It had the Houston fans nervous the way Donovan Mitchell played against them last year in that playoff series.
The thing is with Houston is because they switch everything basically is that you can seek matchups, right? So like if you want Harden guarding Mitchell, well, then you just have Harden's man set a screen for Mitchell, get that switch, and that's where you attack. I don't think Utah likes to ISO very much as Houston will draw you into ISO ball with all their switching. So that's the challenge I think for Utah is to keep the ball moving and keep the players moving against that switch everything defense.
Should be interesting. The West, to me, very compelling series shoe outside of that 1-8, which will be interesting because it's Clippers, Warriors, and the history those two franchises have. And, Doc Rivers will have his team ready to play and compete. Not sure I see the same level of competition in the East, which is strange to say for all these years when the East was considered, and is still by most people considered the weaker of the two conferences. But I have a hard time seeing the Bucks sweating the Pistons in the 1-8 matchup, game 1 Sunday at 7 Eastern on TNT, with Blake Griffin in bubble wrap. I mean, If Blake's not ready to play his best basketball, his healthiest basketball of the season, do the Pistons have a chance to scratch in this series?
No. No, I think this is the best chance for a sweep we've got, especially considering Griffin's injury. It stinks. You know, he had an awesome season.
All NBA season to me, yes.
Yeah, he is the primary reason they are in the playoffs, even though they basically got 2 wins without him down the stretch to claw themselves into the 8th seed. Yeah, it stinks. And then, they're depending now on, Andre Drummond on the glass. Although the Bucks are a very good defensive rebounding team, they're depending on Reggie Jackson, and they're depending on their reserve guards to get hot. Langston Galloways and Luke Kennards of the world. It's tough against a Milwaukee team, even without Malcolm Brogdon, that is just fantastic on both ends of the floor. No team protects the rim better defensively, and obviously the 3-point attack around the drives and attacks of Giannis Antetokounmpo is tough to defend. The one thing is, Detroit is good at taking away threes. They're a team that is near the top of the league in preventing 3-point attempts. I just don't think they have what it takes to, maybe there's 1 or 2 games that are close. I just don't think, I think this is your best bet as at a sweep.
I agree. I don't know what the Pistons do to combat the Giannis factor in this series. Very difficult matchup for them individually. And if Giannis is cooking, everything else opens up for the Bucks in terms of spreading the floor with those shooters. And I think the guy who could really be the critical difference in the series is Lopez. I think Brook Lopez being able to stretch the floor and causing matchup nightmares for Andre Drummond is what ultimately could spell doom for the Pistons in the series. The 2-7 shoe, the Raptors and Magic, game 1, Saturday at 5:00 Eastern on ESPN. This might be my favorite. I call this the Terrence Ross Revenge Tour, which, may only be a moment, could be a game, potentially more than that. He's been playing fantastic for a Magic team that was 11-2 over their final 13 games to really, to me, come out of nowhere and get into the playoffs. I wasn't even thinking about them as a playoff team just before All-Star Weekend, when they really took advantage of teams maybe looking ahead and put themselves in a great position. Is there an opportunity, you think, for them to scratch in this series and make some noise, or are they just glad to finally have gotten back in after all these years in the aftermath of Dwight Howard being in Orlando, and now they've finally kind of gotten that off their ledger?
It's interesting. History tells us that playoff results, late season momentum doesn't mean anything in regard to playoff results.
Right.
That you are who you are over the 82 games and not who you are, since the All-Star break or whatever, right. However you want to break it down. This will be the series that sort of tests that. Orlando had the number 1 defense since February 1st. Mm-hmm. And I think the East's second best record since February 1st.
Right.
We mentioned it last week. At the trade deadline, they were still 5 games out of a playoff spot in the loss column, and decided not to sell off Terrence Ross or Vucevic, and it paid off. And they ended the East's longest playoff drought. I think Toronto is just too good. They've done credit to them for getting through this season and still having the second best record in the league, despite resting Kawhi Leonard all those games, despite, I think it was 16 missed games from Kyle Lowry, or 17 maybe. I think he missed the last game. But it's amazing. With Leonard and Lowry both missing 16 or 17 games or more, they had one or the other in all 82 of their games, which is kind of amazing. They never were missing both of them, which is kind of amazing. But still, the fact that they got through that season with the second best record, with those guys missing all those games, that tells you how good this team could really be. And I don't think we've seen peak Raptors for more than a game at a time. I don't think we ever saw just how good this team could be over an extended amount. This might be the most, other than Philadelphia, I think this is the most intriguing team going into the postseason, just because we don't necessarily know what they have. Marc Gasol, turns out he was a very good big upgrade. They improved quite a bit defensively after that acquisition. And the ball moved.
Some nice moments as well, I think.
Yeah. and the other thing with Gasol did, he increased the ball movement. You look at their like assist rate after the Gasol trade versus before, it dramatically increased. And so that makes him just a little bit tougher to defend. It's not as much Kawhi Leonard ISO ball as it was prior. And so, I don't know if there's a matchup that Toronto really needs to fear. Ross can obviously get hot, but Toronto has 3 or 4 defenders that they can throw at him. Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, Siakam, Anunoby. Well,
I'm looking for huge things. This is hopefully a coming out party, a continued coming out party for Siakam as well. I think I'd love to see how he matches up in the postseason and whether or not he can translate what he did. Like you said, you are what you've been all 82 games. So it's not like, it'll be something different than what he's done all season. But I just want to make sure what we saw from him is legit and that it translates to the playoffs.
Yeah. I still think this could be a sweep.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Although, Ross, Terrence Ross could get hot and win the Magic a game at home, perhaps. But I saw them late in the season. Toronto is really good, and they are maybe a sleeping giant. Maybe we've overlooked them a little bit over the course of the season. They are really, really good, and I can't wait till the next round of the East. I'm excited a little bit about a couple of these matchups. But yeah, like you said, we're maybe just biding time to get to these Eastern Conference semifinals.
Yeah, and that's I'm sure what people in Philadelphia are thinking. They got the 3-6 matchup, the Sixers and the Nets, game 1 Saturday at 2:30 Eastern on ESPN. But the process, Shu, is always lingering, always an issue. Joel Embiid may or may not miss the opener because of that ailing knee of his. There was a little bit of weird back and forth between Elton Brand in the media and then Brett Brown in the media in regards to whether or not Joel Embiid will be available for game 1. Are you concerned at all that Embiid is out and maybe that puts Philly in a precarious position against a Nets team that is not only excited to be in the postseason, but eager to show that they're ready for something bigger than just an appearance in the playoffs?
Embiid is everything. I'll just say that. In fact, in the regular season series, in 58 minutes with Embiid off the floor, the Nets outscored the Sixers by 40 points.
Wow.
That's a fun one, right? Wow. Okay.
Right.
And Brooklyn, they split the season series. Brooklyn was the offense that scored, the Eastern Conference offense that scored most efficiently against the Sixers in the regular season. But Philly was 2-0 with Jimmy Butler and 0-2 without Jimmy Butler against the Nets. The first game was played before the trade. He missed the third game that they played. Only the fourth meeting was the only one that Philly had their 5-star lineup, Simmons, Redick, Butler, Harris, and Embiid lineup. And the Sixers won that one pretty comfortably.
Well, let's be very clear. Philly is operating with a completely different set of pressures on them.
Oh yeah,
in this postseason than maybe any other team, given what they
went
did
all in.
Starting 5. Yeah,
they went all in, and it's fascinating. And I said this last. It's fascinating because that group has played 10 games together. Exactly 10.
Right? 8-2 in the 10 games they played. Yeah,
8-2. So just the fact that Embiid that there was no definite answer about Embiid on Wednesday night with the playoffs 3 days away,
right,
is a concern. Just the fact that there's some sort of doubt, and maybe he plays, but maybe he plays and he's not 100%, and maybe that doesn't matter in the first round. But if he's playing through pain, is he going to get any better? And how much, and then
and what does it do long term?
If they get through the first round, then what does that mean for a possible matchup with Toronto? So I do find this matchup interesting. Like I said, Brooklyn scored pretty efficiently against Philadelphia. They were the team that scored the most points off of drives against the Sixers this season. So the Sixers had issues containing Brooklyn's guards and their attacks. And so, but Embiid if Embiid's healthy, Brooklyn cannot match up with him. I was at that final regular season game between these two teams. He destroyed Jared Allen.
Yeah.
Ed Davis came in. He destroyed Ed Davis. Midway through the second quarter, the Nets got desperate and brought in Rondae Hollis Jefferson, all 6'7" of him, to play center and
Right.
guard Embiid and just try to change things up and make Embiid try to run around with Hollis Jefferson. It actually worked. The Nets, I think, were a plus. Hollis Jefferson had a positive plus minus in that game. But that's how badly he destroyed, their regular centers. And
they're playing with house money. Brooklyn's got nothing to lose, so they should try. Kenny Atkinson should try any and everything to muck this series up. Seriously, you got no reason to hold back.
True.
If you're Brooklyn, you got no reason to hold back. Try anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be a series where they shoot a lot of threes. I'll be curious to see how much zone they play. They did play some zone in that final regular season meeting, and it got destroyed. Mike Scott hit a couple threes. JJ Redick had a wide open three against the zone. But other than Redick, the Sixers don't really have zone busters. There's nobody else. They don't have Bellinelli from last year. They don't have Ilyasova from last year. Yeah. Redick is really their only sort of high volume, high efficiency 3-point shooter. So this might be the series where we see the most zone defense, and obviously it would basically all come from Brooklyn.
Yeah, this was kind of my wild card series in the East too, because if Embiid is a health risk issue for the Sixers, this series maybe goes a little bit longer than expected. Maybe not. And if he's healthy, like you said, there's no match for him. There's nobody that you can say on that Nets roster who will be able to do anything with him if he's rested and ready to go. But the Sixers were 8-10 without him during the season, Shu.
Yep.
And that would worry me if I'm Brett Brown. That, not having him be ready to go potentially becomes a huge issue for the Sixers in this series and moving forward if they're fortunate enough to move on. The last series we're going to look at, of course, is the 4-5 in the East, the Celtics and Pacers. We've known about this one maybe as long as anything. Game 1 is Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern on TNT. Big news in this series, Marcus Smart, Boston's tenacious guard, out indefinitely with a left oblique injury, is expected to miss at least the first 2 rounds, Shu. That would be concerning if it wasn't a Celtics team that made the conference finals last year without 2 of their main players, without Kyrie and Gordon Hayward. Does this affect the Celtics at all in this series? Or is this just a matter of their quality of depth taking over and them handling business against a Pacers team that they've handled in their matchups this season?
I think it's a concern for sure. And I think it does have an effect. There's no matching Smart's intensity and his energy, his sort of toughness defensively. I imagine Jaylen Brown will replace him in the starting lineup. But fun fact, Marcus Smart was a better 3-point shooter than Jaylen Brown this season. Smart was a much improved shooter this year, and that just obviously made it easier for him to stay on the floor.
You combine that with his all-defensive team skills on the other side, it makes him a critical piece for Boston, obviously.
Yeah, but Indiana has struggled down the stretch. I mentioned before that Oklahoma City was the Western Conference playoff team with a losing record after the All-Star break. Well, Indiana was the Eastern Conference team that had a losing record after the All-Star break. And if you really look at, their record with Oladipo, since Oladipo's injury, they lost their first few games after his season-ending injury. And then after February 1st, they were 11-1 against non-playoff teams, and then 5-14 against playoff teams after February 1st. And their offense was not very good in those 19 games. And obviously that includes a couple late season losses to the Celtics. And so I think Celtics should be able to get through this without Smart. Obviously it's a bigger factor going forward in the second round where they, will probably face the Bucks. And then I'll be curious also just how if Boston keeps the Aaron Baines Horford starting lineup together, just replacing Smart with Brown, and then keeping Horford and Baines together in the starting lineup, bringing Marcus Morris off the bench. Horford should be able to stick with Thaddeus Young, and I think that has been their best defensive look all year. Actually, going back the last couple of years. but they just sort of didn't play Baines and Horford together until late in the season, and then it sort of sparked a little bit of a run late in the season.
What's Indiana's best opportunity to shock Boston in this series in terms of early in the series, maybe making it more competitive than people imagine it's going to be? Is there someone that allows them to kind of...
My theory is that they need... Corey Joseph was like one of the worst shooters after the All-Star break, maybe the worst shooter in the league after the All-Star break. He is probably their best defender against Kyrie Irving. I think he's one of the best sort of small defenders in the league. He's not just on the ball. He's really good. Like if you watch him against the Sixers, he's really good at chasing Redick around too. And so he's got to be able to give them some offense so that he can stay on the floor and then therefore, guard Irving and be able to, do a better job, I think, on Irving than Darren Collison would. So that's sort of like a little bit of an X factor for Indiana there. But obviously they need to open things up a little bit. I think, I've said this before, this is the third straight season where they ranked in the top 10 in 3-point percentage, but in the bottom 10 in the percentage of their shots that are threes. They need to be a little bit more willing to shoot from beyond the arc.
I mentioned it about some other series, and I'll say it about this one as well. I want to see some coaches, and this includes Mike D'Antoni, Nate McMillan, Kenny Atkinson. It's the playoffs. You are allowed to take some risks now. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to see any team held back by convention in these playoffs. It's too wide open, in my eyes, Shu. There's an opportunity here to do something crazy. Do it. Now is the time to unleash whatever, you've been holding back as a coach. You want your players to get to the postseason, wipe the slate clean, start fresh, attack each individual matchup in a different way than maybe you did in the regular season. Same goes for the coaches. Don't hold anything back in the first round of these playoffs. And we just went through all of the series on both sides, but now you can also check NBA.com for your playoff preview content for each and every series in the playoffs in the Western and Eastern conferences.
Also check, we have our sort of overview previews where each of us did a couple series.
Right.
Also, in the next couple of days, I'll be having sort of my stats previews. So check the Twitter account. I'll post those on there once they're up on the site as well. So
no question.
That'll dive deep into the numbers, tell you everything you want to know about each team, but also the regular season matchups between each of these teams too.
Great point. Playoffs are underway, folks. They're here. And we're going to be on the road covering games and then coming right back at you like we have all season long, every Monday and every Thursday throughout the postseason.
We're not ready to go away yet.
No. I am definitely ready to go away because I know what you got. You probably got some trivia that I have no chance of answering.
It shouldn't be too bad. It shouldn't be too bad.
All right, I'll go ahead. I'll give you a Schumann stat for the playoffs here, but this is under protest.
All right, the first part one, should be fairly easy.
All right.
What player on a playoff team's roster has played the most regular season games without a postseason appearance, without playing in a postseason game? Should be fairly
Lou
easy.
Williams.
No.
Wait a minute. Give me the question one more time.
He's on a playoff team, one of the 16 playoff teams.
Okay.
He has played, of the players on the 16 playoff teams, he has played the most regular season games without having played in a playoff game.
Okay. All right, I need my lifeline.
Here's a hint. He was on a playoff team last year, but did not play in the postseason because of an injury. A different team that he's on this year.
Different team than one he's on right now.
He has played 565 regular season games.
You're killing me, Shu.
He's an all-star. He's a former all-star.
Former all-star.
565 regular season games. Has never played in the playoffs because he was on a terrible team for most of his career.
Mm-hmm.
Was on a playoff team last year, but was injured prior to the postseason, so he didn't play in the playoffs. And now he's on a different playoff team this year, and he is healthy and will play his first playoff game.
Eastern or Western Conference?
Weekend. Western Conference.
Western Conference. Who would that be? Man, I'm stumped here.
Oh, come on. This should be easy.
Let me
He's
think.
playing on his first playoff game will be Saturday. It's your second hint.
Yeah, I'm looking. I'm thinking, let's see. Nuggets, Spurs, or Warriors, Clippers.
Man, if you're having a hard time with part one, it's gonna be tougher to get to
That's
part
what I
two.
told you. I'm like, you're killing me.
All right, he is a former All-Star, like I said.
Uh-huh.
He is a starting center on a Western Conference playoff team that plays Saturday.
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, what is the point of this shoe? Why are you torturing me with this?
It's not Nikola Jokic. It's not LaMarcus Aldridge. And it is not who's the young Clippers center, Zubac, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not him. So who's the other starting
So
center?
the Warriors starting center, whoever that might be for this game one, that's who you're talking about. And why would that even matter? He's playing with the Warriors. He's going to have a chance to do whatever he wants in the playoffs this year.
So the answer is DeMarcus Cousins has played 565 regular season games without
tore his Achilles last year in New Orleans, so didn't get a chance to participate.
Correct.
In the Pelicans. But
technically, Omri Caspi is the active player with the most regular season games and no appearances in the playoffs, although Caspi was waived by the Grizzlies like in February, I believe. So he's not necessarily on a roster.
All right. So what's the second part of this?
Second part of the question is there are 6 other players on playoff rosters who have played at least 300 regular season games without a playoff appearance.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start. Number 2 after Cousins 565.
Right.
The second one is on the Indiana Pacers, a backup who may or may not necessarily play in their, probably doesn't play in their regular rotation.
Okay.
But did get some playing time on Wednesday before he got ejected.
Before he got ejected?
Yeah, you didn't watch. Did you watch? You were in the studio on Wednesday.
We were watching 11 games. There was a lot of action going on.
Third string center for the Indiana Pacers.
I mean, I remember Kyle O'Quinn cold-cocking, Trae Young, so I know he got ejected, but I forgot he's been playing on crappy teams. So
yes, he played on the Magic and the Knicks,
right?
And now the Pacers. He will make his.
All right. So Kyle O'Quinn is also on
his first playoff appearance after 443 regular season games. Number 3, Orlando Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Most 341 regular season games without he's got
to be Vucevic. I mean, he's been there.
No, right? Vucevic played a postseason game with the Sixers in his rookie year, I think it was. That's right. Before being traded in the big Dwight Howard / Andrew Bynum trade. This guy has only played with the Magic in his career, and he's one of their starters. Aaron Gordon, correct. Yeah. All right, number 4 on the list, Detroit Pistons backup guard, played 339 career games. Also, like Kyle O'Quinn, a former Knick, 339 career games regular season. Langston Galloway, correct. Yeah. All right, the next 2 guys are on the Denver Nuggets, both,
of course,
2 starters on the Denver Nuggets that have played the most games without making the playoffs. Jokic, 308.
And which other starter? I guess Jamal Murray?
Nope.
Yeah.
Murray is probably a little bit further down the list.
Okay. I mean, I know how much experience Paul Millsap has had.
Will Barton has played in the playoffs with Portland. So Gary Harris is the
Gary Harris. He's such a young guy, though. I wouldn't think.
Yeah, but he's been in there a little bit. He's actually played more regular season games than Jokic, 312 to 308. Wow. And the last one, backup center for the Oklahoma City Thunder,
Nerlens
Noel, 300 career games without ever played in the postseason. He should play. So the only one on that list with any sort of doubt about whether he'll play is O'Quinn.
Right.
And so the list of players that will continue. Caspi, like I mentioned, if he gets back in the league, he's played 588 regular season games without playing in the playoffs, although he was on a playoff roster that and never played. Next is Brandon Knight, 421. He of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Then Alex Len, 412. Lance Thomas, 392, still toiling with those Knicks.
Mm-hmm.
Ben McLemore, who was waived this season, and then Elfrid Payton, Quincy Acey, who was also waived this season, but I assume he's still considered an active player. Then Nick Stauskas and Julius Randle. All those guys have played at least 300 regular season games without having played in the playoffs, and obviously their streaks will continue.
Right. Well, from the things you absolutely don't need to know, but John Schumann will inform you anyway, department.
That's always one of my face. So, you feel good. This is the guys you feel good for, like, right? Making your first playoff appearance after toiling on bad teams for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Boogie Cousins. Stay healthy. Enjoy the postseason for the technically playing in the postseason for the first time in his career. Good stuff as always, Shu. And we'll get a chance to revisit a lot of these series, obviously, after some games are played this weekend. Make sure you lock in and join us here on the Hang Time Podcast, as I mentioned, throughout the postseason, every Monday, every Thursday, breaking down games, previewing games, talking about the news and all the other things that are going on around the league throughout the postseason. Should be interesting. This opening weekend, somebody's going to get shocked or get a jolt to the system. There's too many opportunities for crazy stuff to happen, and we'll be there to make sure we got it all taken care of so you can talk about it, read about it, and see it on all our platforms. Be sure to subscribe to Hang Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. All season long, we're here. Make sure you leave a review for John Schumann in New Jersey and parts unknown in the coming weeks. This is Sekou Smith in Atlanta. We will see you right here next time on the Hang Time Podcast.